Well, good evening to each one of you. I hope we all understand the privilege that it is for us to be gathered together this evening. Not everybody in the world has this opportunity. For the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for growing up into Him in all things, this is a great opportunity if this is your life's goal. Tonight, I was praying about what to share tonight, and Sunday, in the Sunday school, we were reading here on the lesson focus, and it said, talking about the Jews returning from their 70-year captivity, were torn between hope and discouragement. The book of Ezra and Nehemiah described their struggles. The predictable, troublous times were upon them. Zechariah helped to give the people a God's eye view of their situation. And as I was listening and reading along, a God's eye view of their situation hit me. I thought, well, wouldn't that be nice if we could get a God's eye view of our situation? You know, that would help us through all of our struggles. That would spur us on to victory after victory. God's eye view of our situation. Have you ever heard the term having the owner's eye? The owner's eye? Anybody in business, or anybody running a business, better have heard the term or at least put it to practice. If you don't have the owner's eye in business, you're probably going to mess up an awful lot. And you can get out there and work and sweat and do all you want to do, but if you're not having the perspective of the owner when he shows up, what he's going to think when he looks at it, you're probably going to be putting a lot of sweat and labor out, and there's going to be no reward for that. Very likely, if you're doing your own thing. Having the owner's eye has to do with while the job is being done, you're looking at things from the perspective of the owner. Right. What's he going to think? What if he shows up and sees that? Is he going to like that? Let's take care of that. Let's take care of that. Let's watch out for this. Let's take care of the flowers. The owner's eye. It's necessary for securing the reward of your labor. All right, tonight I want to talk about God's eye view. He is our owner. He is the owner of the planet, and so essentially it's having the owner's eye, or learning the owner's eye, having that perspective. But I want to pivot off God's eye view of our situation. You have to have that same perspective when it comes to pleasing a boss in a business. It may not be the owner of the company that you're working for, and you may be an employee. It's the same idea. If he has certain ways he likes to do things, and he walks away and you do things your own way, you might work all day long, and he may show up, and it may have to all be undone. Tell you what, next time you probably won't be daydreaming. The situation with God and us is of so much more importance, but that same basic principle applies. But in this situation, by the time the owner shows up, you don't have that second chance. And so it's so important that you pay attention to what he's said. Amen. We need to get a God's eye view of our situation. Picture a father training his son to be the owner of the business. That son he has a great future. The father has a great future in mind for his son. But that son is going to have to go through many, many hard days, getting paid what everybody else gets paid, learning how to work from the bottom up for a long time before he's ever eligible to become in charge of the business. And in those hot and hard days, there's going to be many days where it seems like it'll never happen. I'll never get there. But everybody can understand that a loving and wise father would make his son go through the necessary steps of training before he could be owner or in charge of the business. So what if that son displayed deep character flaws that would ruin the business should he take control? hot temper, selfishness, ingratitude, dishonesty, lazy, sneaky, wasteful with time, disrespectful, on and on. So many character flaws it could be. Any one of those is going to destroy the integrity of the company, which is more important in this situation than the boy being in charge. Well, that really complicates the job of the father when those things are displayed. So, just say he didn't have those character flaws. He still has to go through the training. He still has to go through the schooling, the hard days, many years. But then when we add into the mix these problems, now he's got to go through more intense training, a more distasteful training. And the more that this bad character flaw that shows up, the more likely this son is to never be in control of the business. You can picture the king training his son to be ruler in his kingdom in the same way. That son needs to spend a lot of days out there in the field laboring with the common people so that he knows how to rule well. He has to have an understanding of what he's ruling over. He has to have a grip on reality in the kingdom before he can make a good and benevolent king. What if that son displayed those deep character flaws that would ruin the kingdom should he take control? Or should he have dominion over a part of the realm? Wasteful with his time, disrespectful, sloppy, partial in judgment, partial to himself, partial to his friends. What does the father have to do? Well, he has two options. If he's a good king and he's concerned about the kingdom, he has two options if he cares about his son. More intensive training, or toss him out. Or you lose the kingdom. You have to have the perspective right. You have to have the Father's perspective. You have to have God's eye view of your situation, and I have to have it of my situation. We are in the training period. We need to understand it from the Father's perspective. So the king is looking for opportunities to train, to shape, to mold us because he has a glorious future plan for us. Jesus told the parable, 5 cities, 10 cities that have the rule over this many and that many. He's got great plans in store. We have to go through the necessary training. Lots of labor, lots of hard days. We have to be tested and we have to test out. And if in the process of that testing, we allow deep problems, character flaws to show up, your only hope is more training, more intense training, or to be cast out. No hope for you at all. Think of it. That's your only options. Okay? You want to be a brat? You think you're going to manipulate God into sending you right into heaven because you're not happy? You want to be selfish? It's just going to get harder and harder and harder for you to ever make it to what God has in mind for you. The sooner you surrender to the hand of the Father, doesn't make life easy. It gets you on to productive training. The other stuff is corrective training. It's intense. It's harder. If you couldn't handle the first stuff, the chance of you handling the next stuff gets slimmer and slimmer. Right. God doesn't come down and say, I'm so sorry that I started putting you through testing. Shouldn't have done it. I didn't know you was going to cry. He's not going to do that for you. Because he cares about you. But he cares about the kingdom. Right. The kingdom is more important than you and me. And though you set out to go through the schooling, go through the training, and you try to have the best heart and the best intentions, you still only appropriate for him to send you through the school of hard knocks because there's a lot we need to learn. And we didn't start out in a great place either. There's reconciliation that needs to be made, and we need to get on with our schooling with a good attitude. God is trying to train sons and daughters for his kingdom. And that's a glorious thing for each of us. If he quit trying to do that, we would have no hope. We would be of all men most miserable. Headed to a miserable destination. I guess I would ask you tonight, are you one of God's children? What character traits is God watching in you? Are you okay with having a father who loves you based on an eternal perspective, where the kingdom is more important than you? What else would you want? That's a good question to ask yourself. Well, I wouldn't want anything else. Now, be honest. Would you not want anything else? Are you okay with God's training program? What are you showing God that you want? God knows. The Father of the Son knows, whether anybody else knows or not. The Father of the Son knows, and God knows what character flaws he's trying to root out. How hard is it going to be for him to root those out? How many children think their parents, while they're children, while they're still receiving discipline, how many children actually have a proper appreciation for appropriately applied discipline? Why are you raising your eyebrows? It's not very common, is it? Listen, we're God's children, but we're supposed to be spiritual adults. We're supposed to understand the principles of the kingdom. Couldn't we show God appreciation for his school? I think you probably could, unless you're trying to fight with character flaws. Are you thankful for the pain and the testing and the growing experiences? Do you thank God for them? Understand, without them, you do not have a benevolent, loving Heavenly Father with an eternal perspective, with a kingdom higher than yourself, more important than you. You don't have anything more glorious than anything this world has to offer waiting for you. There's no real hope for you. What we have that's good for us is the fact that there is a God out there who cares, who's bigger than the devil, bigger than his program, and tries to make us something much bigger than we could ever become by ourselves. And the fact that he takes the pains to come down to watch us, to grow us, to teach us, to throw things in our path, to teach us patience, is a great blessing. I just think it's appropriate that we show God gratitude, not just in our words, but that we see his hand steering us. Sometimes it hurts, sometimes it's hot, sometimes it's hard. But that we respond in a way that shows God, I appreciate your correction. And we realize that without that, we're doomed. The driver who mocks and disregards and acts like he just doesn't like being helped when he's driving down the road from someone who cares and is reasonable when they point out something that maybe he didn't notice. The one who acts cocky about that, obviously his biggest goal is himself, his pride. His biggest goal, the most important thing to him, is not arriving somewhere safely. It's his ego. The one who says, hey, I appreciate you pointing that out. Doesn't have to say, just want to let you know I saw that. Yeah, I know, you can be quiet. It's a difference in character, what your priorities are, by how you respond to that correction. That same response to correction will also be noticed in every other area of life where there's training. Do your parents know that you appreciate their guidance? But adults, I'm talking to us. We understand these principles. You can't necessarily get this through to a child, but a converted adult ought to be able to understand these principles. You resist him, he will let you go. Then we ask the question, do you really want to go to heaven? When you adopt God's eye view of your situation, you're going to see a pretty small speck on the planet of very little significance. And you're going to see a big God with a lot of power and control who cares enough about you to take some time to help you become something great. Adopting God's eye view of ourselves is something that should begin to take place at conversion. It should be what spurred you into conversion. But it's so easy to lose that view and start getting our sights set on something else. One of the biggest things that would change for someone if they adopted God's eye view, there's a couple key things that I want to talk about that will take place in your life. And it has to do with our understanding, our view of our situation. Number one, like I mentioned, the view of yourself. The view of yourself. It's not going to put you lower. You're not going to view yourself lower than you are. You're going to view yourself where you're at. And it's pretty low. In 1 Samuel 15, we have the scenario where Samuel said unto Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint thee king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore hearken unto the voice of the words of the Lord. And he sends him to go take care of Amalek. Somewhere in the process of that, Saul decides that he's going to decide what's vile and refuse and start making separations when God said destroy all of it. Well, we saved the best and destroyed the vile. Vile to who? God said destroy all of it. There was obviously an element of vile in God's perspective for all of it. Saul elevated himself to a position to start making some decisions here. And God comes through Samuel to him. In verse 17, well, in verse 16, he says, Then Samuel said unto Saul, Stay, and I will tell thee what the Lord has said unto me this night. Stay, and I will let you know God's view of you, smarty pants. And he said unto him, Say on. And Samuel said, When thou wast little in thine own sight, wast thou not made the head of the tribes of Israel, and the Lord anointed thee king over Israel? And God sent you on a journey to kill the Amalekites, and you didn't obey the Lord, but didst fly upon the spoil, and didst evil in the sight of the Lord. God's eye view of the situation. Oh no, we saved the best of the sheep and the oxen to do sacrifice unto the Lord our God. A deceived view of the situation. When thou wast little in thine own sight, Saul viewed himself in a more accurate position. And he got God's attention by doing that. God cannot use me or you until we view ourselves in our proper position. And we're going to go through a few of the things that help us identify how we view ourselves and whether we view ourselves where we belong. There are certain things, certain attitudes in our lives that simply will not be there when you view yourself little in your own sight, in your proper place. And two, you'll get a proper understanding of your Father's motive in what circumstances He allows in your life. Number one, you'll change your view of yourself. And number two, you'll get a proper understanding of your Father's motive in what circumstances He allows in your life. You may wonder why that makes any big difference. It makes a big difference. Ingratitude either comes from intense rebellion or at best an improper view of understanding your Father's motive in what He has allowed. And I was thinking about different people in the Bible who probably had a really good grip on that. A few came to mind as I thought of Joseph. Who would want to live the life of Joseph? Sold by his brethren as a slave to a foreign country. Joseph went through many years. It wasn't 5 years even. It wasn't 10 years. It was many years. I don't remember exactly how many years it was, but I think it was more than 10. Of what we would consider extremely miserable life, existence. But Joseph was little in his own sight, so that all the while he's out there sweating and laboring for nothing, and then being accused falsely, and then sweating and laboring in the prison for years and years. And the Lord was with Joseph. Joseph never forsook the Lord in that situation. There's not any recording of him getting angry, getting disillusioned. How's that happen? There's two key things in Joseph's life that had to be there. He had to have a proper view of himself, and so not to expect too much for himself. And he had to have a proper understanding of his father's motives in what circumstances he allowed in his life. He had to understand that God was doing this for his good, and that if he stuck with it, there could be glory at the end of this. Did God come down and promise that to him? Did God tell him everything that was going to happen good at the end? No, but he understood that the God who he believed in was in control and had good in mind. And that if he would be willing to go through God's school, and in this case a very specially hard school, the reward at the end for the labor would be matched to the school. And so Joseph stuck it out as a young man for many, many years in prison and as a slave. I think of David. He had two opportunities to kill the man that sought his life, chased him out of the country, gave his wife to another man, on and on, for years and years. You know, David didn't get brought into Israel until Saul was dead after he had reigned over Israel 40 years. I have to imagine there was quite a few years that David was on the run. He had two opportunities. He had friends there telling him, the Lord, like the Lord said unto you, he's going to deliver you into his hand, him into your hand. David had God's eye view of the situation. First time he felt bad because he cut the hem of his skirt off, while everybody else was saying, kill him. Everybody else is saying, kill him. And David expects more out of himself than to cut the hem of a skirt off. Afterwards, he felt bad about that. There's some deep character in these men that holds them in these incredibly difficult time. Another thing I want to talk to you about God's eye view, is that when God views me and when God views you, his view takes in the fact that he viewed these other men too, what they went through. God's eye view also sees the men out there who are suffering for their faith and sometimes incredible degrees of suffering. God's eye view takes in the whole picture. And no, thankfully, it's not partial to me or you. So the second time, David does even better. And he didn't dishonor the Lord's anointed at all. The devil gave him, or God gave him in the school, or the devil gave him, depends on which way you want to go with that. God allowed him to have this opportunity twice. And the second time he did even better. That's amazing. How could a man do this without a perspective from God's viewpoint? Then when he's running out of Jerusalem because of Absalom's rebellion, we see David operating with this same God's eye perspective. When the man's out there cursing and throwing stones, and David evaluates the situation. I wonder how you evaluate situations. David evaluates the situation and goes, you know, just thinking from God's perspective, this is a really good opportunity for me to act in a noble way, and allowing this will help me get God's favor. Wow. When's the last time we were in a hard situation? I mean hard. He's running for his life. His son is rebelling and taking the kingdom from him. And he's not all filled with anger and full of himself and trying to save himself. He had a proper view of himself. He was little in his own sight. He was the king of Israel. On the run. Could have been in tiger mode. Very hard situation. And he's not all uptight, ready to save his life. If the Lord's done with me, that's okay. But if he's not done with me, this is a good way to get in God's favor. I know the way God operates. And so let that be. Next time you're going through something that you think's just about as hard as you can take. Probably still not quite as hard as Joseph. Probably not still quite as hard as David. But when it's about all you can take, try to get God's view on the subject. God's view will put you in your place. God's view will not expect over much for you. God's view is okay when God's done with you, if you have God's perspective. And God's view will give you a proper understanding of your Father's motive in what circumstances He allows for you. So stop and try to understand. From God's view, I'm really small. I'm going through a series of testing so that I can become something great, only with His help. This is an opportunity to gain God's favor. God's not interested in greenhouse plants. He wants somebody that can stand the storms of life. And when He sees you taking a storm, that's a great opportunity. From God's perspective, that is the best golden opportunity. That is the most eternal opportunity you have on earth to take advantage of, is your hardest moment. That's when God is ready, giving you something and watching. He's not going to pay that close of special attention on the everyday average situation. But there are times we see in the Bible when God gives special testing to people to see what's in them, to display it for some spiritual purpose, some spiritual good that you may have no idea about. Are you okay with that? It's a golden opportunity. From looking back from heaven's perspective, you'll be like, why didn't I take advantage of every golden opportunity? I was a greenhouse plant. David knew that God was his only hope. From God's perspective, from a God's eye view, it gets you in your proper place. You realize that you can't do it on your own in your proper place. A big elevated view of yourself, you'll start trying. You'll blunder terribly, but get yourself in a proper view of yourself. Now you're ready for the warfare. Because before you had a warped view. Just because you have a warped view doesn't give you any, it gives you a disadvantage. Thinking you can do it when you can't is not safe. But David knew that God was his only hope. Killing that man wasn't going to help him as much as gaining God's favor. And he knew that in Saul's situation. Talk about it. A shortcut right there. God had anointed him. Shortcut. Kill that man. Get your wife back. Get back in the land of Israel. Get your life going again. He bypassed many shortcuts. David made it a long way in his life. He became one of the great men in the earth. But he bypassed the shortcuts to get there. If he hadn't have, he'd have probably never made it. Almost guaranteed. Those shortcuts end in miserable failure. And they are no shortcuts because shortcuts will still get you to some place, the same place. But you think they're a shortcut. And it may get you to your short-sighted view of where you think you're going temporarily. Shortcuts end in miserable failure, but God's way ends in victory. Shortcuts end in regret. God's way ends in glory. You might be like, well, I'm miserable anyway. I don't think it could get much worse than this. Yeah, David was miserable too. Let me tell you, we don't know what miserable is yet. You might be struggling now, but you have hope that it leads to glory. And in light of that glory, even the Apostle Paul said, for our light affliction, he had God's eye view of his situation. For our light affliction, well, he must have had it easy. No, the Apostle Paul had it hard from humanly speaking terms. He had God's eye view of his situation. And in light of that, our light affliction, which is but for a moment, mine's going on and on and on. You know what, young people? You're not even as old as the Apostle Paul was from the time he was converted. You haven't even lived as long as he was a Christian running for his life. A lot of us. Which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more and exceeding weight of glory. The Apostle Paul had a glimpse of it. There is sorrow in the world. But you take those shortcuts, and the sorrow of the world is going to work death. There is sorrow in the world when you're living down here doing things God's way too. Look at Joseph. Look at David. Look at them. But there's a far more exceeding an eternal weight of glory to follow. Like I said about having the owner's eye, you can toil and labor all day long. If you don't care about the owner's eye, there will be no reward for your toil and your labor. You may have chosen to do a few things a little easier and done this and done that and found yourself in a mess over here because you didn't follow the instructions your boss gave you. So you had to work extra hard to fix that, but you got it kind of fixed and get through the day. At the end of the day, there's no reward for your labor. I think it's very likely on average the ungodly people that are going to hell are living through as much stress and frustration and garbage in life, or more in some cases, and maybe some less in some cases, than the man who has God's eye view, has the owner's eye, and makes sure that when he labors and stresses and struggles, it's going to have a reward, because it's going to be done in line with the owner's eye, the owner's perspective, his preferences, what he wants. You're not going to get away from work. You're not going to get away from sorrow. You're not going to get away from stress. You might trade stress for stress and work for work and try to while your way around through life. I guarantee you that David never regretted the fact that he didn't take those shortcuts. Guaranteed. Those never made it on his regret list. He had one, but those weren't on there. No, he had another list too, and I guarantee you they were on that list, a victory list. The most precious memories, the things that thrilled his soul, and they will stay on that list through eternity. I think of Abraham with Isaac. God's eye view. What did God just ask me to do? Well, I guess from God's perspective, I'm pretty small, and He's got a lot of power. I'd probably better listen to Him. I'm sure that He has good motives in mind. I trust His motives. This must be a golden opportunity, because this looks really hard. If this is a golden opportunity, I better make sure I don't mess up at all, because I'm being watched very closely. Amen. Okay, I'm ready for this. God's eye view. Get God's perspective. God's not really worried about your little financial loss, your blown motor on your car. He doesn't want to overburden people more than they can handle, but He will take advantage of things that make us work in life to see what's in us. Take it and give it and see what's in us. Be glad when He takes a moment to come and see what's in you and you can show Him. Amen. If you think you're any good. Abraham knew God must have a good plan. He never regretted it. Guarantee you he never regretted it, and he never will. It gave him an experience with God that he would have never had he not done what he did. He didn't know. God didn't say, if you go do this, I'll let him live and I'll talk to you from heaven. He didn't do that. Abraham just had to trust God's motives and allow Him to control his life. You know what it really comes down to is God really Lord of your life or not? Are you a believer or not? These things will test that. And when you stand before God and He calls you an unbeliever, He's probably going to bring up situations like this. He said, you didn't trust my motives when I was trying to put you through school. Gave him an experience with God that he would have never had if he would have declined. No, Abraham didn't decline. Got up early in the morning. I think Abraham probably had a lot of feelings inside. It was probably excitement, anticipation, and a lot of I'm not sure what. Something's big going on here. God doesn't ask these kinds of things from people. Folks, the things we go through are pretty common, generally. Pretty common struggles, okay? And we struggle with them. They make sense. God never asked you to do this. If you can't trust God enough to get through your everyday common struggles, your attitude, things like that, you'll never pass a test like this. If you give yourself excuses for that, you'll have a multitude of excuses for why you wouldn't do this, and you'll never get an experience with God with victory. You may not hear from heaven. God did many different ways through the Bible with different people, but let me tell you, when you make it through some of these golden opportunities, you will come away from that situation, and God will have spoken to your heart in a way that will be memorable to you. Things that you wouldn't trade. And it will deepen your commitment and deepen your trust in His ability and His motive for you. I haven't lived very long. I've been through a couple situations where I really needed to put my trust in the Lord. And I know I didn't hear anything like Abraham heard. I didn't hear anything more than any of you guys hear. But I can know that the Lord came through in an amazing way. I didn't do that. I let Him have it. I also know what work He was trying to do in my heart through the middle of it that nobody else knew about. I also know what needed taken care of. I also knew that God was trying to put me through school and He was looking for results. And I know that that's the way He operates. It's a proper way to operate. And He'll probably operate the same way with you. I think of Daniel, who saw the challenge with the king's meat as an opportunity to gain favor with God. Let me ask you, are you looking for opportunities to gain favor with God? Let me ask you, are you a Christian? Are you a believer? Do you believe that He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him? Okay, are you looking for opportunities to gain favor with God? It's not going to be a glory trip for you. You're going to be taking advantage of golden opportunities to gain favor with God. No, Daniel didn't know that him taking this course was going to give him all these visions and he was going to meet with the angel and have visions and amazing opportunities with God. Daniel didn't know what he was going to get. Didn't matter. Daniel had God's eye view perspective of himself, and he was small in his own sight, and he was willing to be God's man no matter where that put him. But he wasn't going to defile himself with the king's meat. Didn't matter if it killed him. And he was willing to eat pulse. You wonder why I mentioned that? Because some people would rather die than eat pulse their whole life. And I don't mean that by just the food. I mean that by your circumstances, your life. If I can't have that, I'd rather die. I don't want to live for God this way. Daniel was willing to live, serve the best he could without defiling himself, and live a harder life serving so that he didn't defile himself. He didn't say, just kill me then. Daniel was gaining favor with God. Well, Daniel's test is over. I think he did quite well. The question tonight is, are you trying to gain favor with God, and will you gain favor with God? Daniel's steps of obedience gave him experiences that were incredible, and he never regretted it. Never will. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had a God's eye view of themselves and staked their lives on it. They were willing to be thrown into the fire, the temporary flames. Because according to the God's eye view perspective that they had, it would spare them from eternal flames. Hey, I got an idea. Why weren't they smart enough to go bow to the image and pray to God? And in case that didn't work, fix it later. They had God's eye view perspective, and they realized that would be quite foolish. Now, we all agree that's quite foolish. But you know why I mentioned that. I know people who think they're pretty smart. And something like that might go through their head. That's not smart. When you get God's eye view perspective and you see what a small little crumb you are and how big God is, and you understand His motives, are you going to try pulling a fast one on God? That would be so foolish. And yet, to save their life, some would reason it away. That's reality. That's a sad reality. Anytime you choose to follow your own way, for now, I can apologize later, you're doing exactly that. Every single time. And God's looking at you going, really? Now we know it's foolish for them to do. Do we see it that foolish for ourselves? Think about it when it's time for you to make a decision. You would trade a golden opportunity. You know who went into the flames with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Was he standing in there saying, it's okay, guys, you can come in, go ahead and defy him, it'll be okay? No. No. He showed up after they were thrown in, and the men were slain on the spot who threw him in. That's how God will operate. Once you have shown Him your full surrender, and you have passed your test. By the time they were thrown in, they had passed their test. And God was there to bring them back, and He decided to save them that time. But it was okay if He didn't. And they stated that. Honestly, it seems that they depended on God in some way to save them, but they probably didn't have any idea they'd be walking in the fire with one like the Son of Man, or the Son of God. They saw an incredible opportunity to gain favor with God, and they weren't going to trade anything for it. And what shall I more say? Hebrews 11:32. For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon, of Barak, of Samson, of Jephthah, of David also, and Samuel, and of the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Now I want you to pay attention to something here. A lot of ungodly people turned to flight aliens, fought the sword and escaped it, went through a lot of hard experiences for no good at all because they didn't do it with a God's eye view and do it right. There was a lot of battles fought by a lot of wicked people who went to hell. What I'm trying to say is get God's eye view perspective. Get the owner's eye before you start your business. You're going to have to work either way. Do it in a way that's productive. And you'll also notice these godly people, it sounds like, boy, they were just whooping up on everybody. They had fire. They had sword. They had weakness. They had fight. They had armies to fight. They wrought righteousness. They subdued kingdoms. That was hard. They had lions. Women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance when it was offered for them to lose their golden opportunity. They had God's eye view perspective. Otherwise, you would accept deliverance. that they might attain a better resurrection. They had God's eye view perspective. They gave them that eternal perspective that this light affliction is but for a moment. It's working something big for me. It's a golden opportunity. I would never pass it. Matter of fact, not everybody gets this golden of an opportunity. It's going to be that God's eye view perspective that ever helps you should persecution come, should you be tortured and taken away. God's eye view perspective will help you. When you get whipped, you'll come out and rejoice that you were counted worthy to suffer for the name of Christ because you understood that was a golden opportunity. I'm better off with it than without it. And you'll never change your mind on that. These men never regretted this. And others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover, of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword, wandered in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, stoned, sawn asunder, tempted. And we can understand that. Maybe not to the degree they understood it. Slain with the sword, destitute, afflicted, tormented. God's eye view perspective sees these people while he watches us complain. He will not give you the same heaven he gives them. It wouldn't be fair if we don't follow the same path with the same perspective and trust the motive of the Father who's training us. These people wouldn't trade. Now, they've got something golden, a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. They knew that God was a rewarder of them that diligently sought him, and they wouldn't miss an opportunity. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith, all of them, so many different circumstances, yet they had something in common that puts them all in the all category. They all trusted God's motives and were little in their own sight, and they all have these golden opportunities. But they don't, so-and-so, yeah, but Joseph wasn't Daniel. It wasn't the lion's den for David. Oh, but David, yeah, but he didn't lose his wife. He didn't get his wife taken away. Listen, you could sit there and compare yourself to everybody else and be a big failure if you want to be a big failure. Or you can say, I have a golden opportunity here. If yours is worse than his, it's more golden. God's eye view perspective is really powerful for helping a Christian to victory. You see Saul again in 1 Samuel 13. When he reigned 2 years over Israel, he's in a situation that we're very familiar with. Saul gets himself worked up, and he's not so little in his own sight anymore. When the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait, for the people were distressed, then the people hid themselves in caves and in thickets and in rocks and in high places and in pits, and some of the Hebrews went over Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. As for Saul, he was yet in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. Listen, do you think God was worried about the Philistines? Somebody didn't have God's eye view perspective of this situation. Was God trembling and hiding? Was God in a strait? No. God was having school with Saul. If Saul had maintained God's eye view perspective of his situation, he would have said, people, this is golden opportunity. Wait and see the salvation of the Lord. This is a good time to get close to God. He's watching close. That was like the biggest thing on God's plan that was going on in the world probably at that time. It was his nation under, again, a great strain, great stressful situation. It was a good time to trust the motive of his father, of God. It was a golden opportunity. God's sitting there deciding whether he's going to establish Saul in the kingdom. God's not worried about the Philistines. Right. And he tarried 7 days according to the set time that Samuel had appointed. But Samuel came not to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him, and God's watching him. I'm having school with Saul. There's probably a lot of spiritual watching going on in this situation. It was a golden opportunity. It brought Saul to the forefront like he'd never probably been before. A very pivotal moment. And Saul's down here trembling and worried and watching the people run and panicking and doing everything wrong. Victory was at his fingertips. It was a golden opportunity. Saul reasons that if he offers the sacrifice, it'll give moral support and courage to the people, and he'll be able to explain it to God later. Surely that'd work. It's not that Saul didn't know. He reasoned something in his mind. And it says that when he saw the people were scattered from him, he forced himself. He went ahead and did it. Why wouldn't that work? God would surely understand. God wants victory here too, does God's looking for victory other than what you're looking for. There's some other victory here that God's looking for. He can give you that one. Folks, we're so short-sighted. I'm not trying to pick Saul apart because we already know that Saul made failures. Trying to help us make application here. Was it because Saul wasn't smart enough? If he'd been a little smarter, he probably could have done it in a way where he kind of got away with it. Should have been a little more slick, a little more savvy. Yeah, I can see where he messed up. Fool. You sure don't have God's eye view perspective. You're pretty small. Think God doesn't have you all figured out? Why wouldn't that work? I can get it fixed later, right? We can save our hide today and I can get it fixed later. How many people make that decision on maybe a medium to fairly regular basis? Young people? Older people? You know what? I'm venting today. I've had enough. I know it's not the perfect thing to do, but I'm letting it out. I've had enough. What are you saying? I'm going to do what Saul did and I'll fix it up later, but I've had enough. That will never work for you. It will never work to your advantage because God said, don't do it. And you know God said don't do it, and you're going to do it anyway. And God will never, ever, ever, ever be mocked. Doesn't matter how slick you think you are. Doesn't matter if you fooled everybody on the whole planet. Anyway, it goes on down. Samuel said, what hast thou done? Saul said, because I saw the people were scattered from me, and thou camest not within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered themselves together at Michmash. Hard stuff. You want to look down on Saul. God's eye view perspective is not partial to you and to me. Saul was in a hard situation. And if God was real raw and honest with us and he came and told us his perspective, he would probably say, you guys are pansies. I've seen you fail and much smaller. I've seen you make that same decision and trade and make that little manipulative decision, think you're going to get away with it on something that would be 100 times smaller the stress. So don't get puffed up. Be not high-minded, but fear. And down a little further, but now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart. Thy kingdom shall not continue. Wow, what was going on while Saul was in a frenzy? That costs a lot. Losing God's eye view perspective in a situation like that can cost you a lot. You know, God doesn't have to have you. God didn't have to have Saul. He was the king of God's people. God didn't have to have Saul. What God was doing for Saul was for Saul. And if Saul wanted to forfeit it, that hurt Saul more than it hurt anybody. But here's something else. God has sought him a man after his own heart. A man that has learned and adopted God's eye view perspective and lives by it, do or die. And that was David. Talk about a difference in character from where Saul is now to what David went through while Saul was chasing him. And that was God's school for David, and it made a great king. Because David saw his opportunities as golden. He had a proper perspective. A man after God's own heart. Couldn't be scared into taking shortcuts. Trusting your Heavenly Father's motive is the very basis of the Christian faith, and it's the only thing that will get you to heaven. You will not get to heaven until you've learned to trust God's motives and accept and appreciate and allow to change you all of the circumstances that He brings your way. Now's a good time to start taking advantage of golden opportunities. But without faith, it is impossible to please Him. For he that cometh to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. And this kind of sums it up in a nutshell right there. That He is what He is. That He is what He is. That's getting yourself little in your own sight, adopting God's eye view perspective. When you realize that God is what He is, as big as He is, and you realize that you are what you are, you don't just believe that He's out there somewhere. That's not believing that God of the Bible is. And that He's a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. You trust His motive. That's faith. And you will not please Him without this. Without accepting this with joy. Without being joyful that you're counted worthy to be in God's school. When those two things are in their proper perspective, the God's view of yourself and God's view of your view of God's motives, a proper view of those, you will be humble. You will be grateful. You will be faithful. You will be moldable pottery for God's hands. You will be excited about God's service more than anything else. A whole sermon could be preached on that right there, young people. Young men, you will be excited. I mean, God will think you're excited about His service more than anything else. It won't even be close. It will be unrivaled. Your job won't rival it. Your wants won't rival it, because your wants will be in line with God's wants. And you won't even get to the point where you just do it because it's right. You will be excited about it when you have God's eye view perspective. You won't just come out and not complain that you were whipped for Christ. You'll come out and rejoice that you were counted worthy to serve, to suffer, to have a golden opportunity. Until we're at that point, our faith is small. And we're not very far along in our pleasing God. Because it's impossible to please Him without having faith that He's a rewarder of those that diligently seek Him. You will be occupying very productively in anticipation of his return. Think about Jesus' parable of the talents. That's God's perspective. Somebody decided, I've been handed some things. I'll kind of keep that here. If he comes back, I'll be like this. But in case this doesn't work out, I'm going to do something over here too. And when he comes back, they're like, hold on, this? Like, yeah, that. You were handed that. That was a golden opportunity. Why didn't you do something with that? Why didn't you do something with that? You're like, no, this, it's good. Yeah, it's good. Why didn't you do something with it? Oh. More damnation because you had it and you didn't use it. When you trust God in this way, any opportunity he puts in your hands, any opportunity that you can grab, you'll take it, just like you would a good paying job. Because you're living for a new life. You'll be warning sinners. God's work will become the most important thing in the world to you. It will be an unrivaled priority in your life, and God will be the first to testify of it for you. I'm not going through this list for no reason. This is called self-examination time. You want to go to heaven? You want to be God's child? We're in God's school. I'm in God's school. I know it's not always easy. But I do know something. If you learn to view hard times, which are actually our hard times, right, as golden opportunities, you will live a much more joyful life. When you make it through your hard times with God's view, God's eye view perspective of the whole situation, and you make it through keeping that in mind, there is no greater joy to look back on. And it'll give you momentum for the next one. Unrivaled priority. Unrivaled priority. Go home and let that ring in your head all night long. Unrivaled. Unrivaled. How many people in here does God think that He is the unrivaled priority in their life? And it's not close. You're not trying to please me. I don't need to know it. I don't need to be impressed by it. There is someone with whom we have to do. He needs to testify it for you. Not mommy or daddy or brother or sister. God needs to testify it for you or it does you no good. In your heart, in your mind, as you're thinking. God should, when you get alone with God, He will let you know if He feels rivaled. Things will come to mind. Let me tell you, if God feels like He has a rival in your life, you are not on your way to heaven. You are not. Because when you get a God's eye view perspective, you are so small. And that thing that's rivaling Him, which is so big and so benevolent, and has everything for you, that thing that's rivaling Him is so small and so insulting that it's impossible for you to have a rival for Him and have a God's eye view perspective unless you're a total rebel. And those don't make it. You will have a testimony that you please God. You will have that by God, and you will have that to all of those around you who care about God. You will be called the friend of God, not by yourself, by others and by God. Does God feel like He's my friend? That's my friend. If I had an earthly friend, right there. You will be building an ark to the saving of all those around you who will listen. You will, around you, who will listen with or without any help. I don't know if that made much sense. You will be building an ark for God's kingdom to save and to help save anyone around you, whether anybody's pushing you or prodding you or encouraging you or praying with you at all. You will be a pioneer Christian, so to speak. If you have a God's eye view perspective. Without God's eye view perspective, you will labor and stress your whole life away at one thing or another, and there will be no reward at the end. Keeping God's eye view, letting it dictate your every move in life, will be building eternal equity for a future home. And there is great recompense of reward. You will be beloved of your God when God says, I have found me a man after my own heart. Can God say that about you? Don't miss your golden opportunities. Pray that that'll go with us. God's eye view perspective. Make him your unrivaled priority, and don't miss golden opportunities. Take those 3 takeaways with you.